Terrance, T-Roc, Colby ruled with strategy, Malik, stone, Jefferson enforced with fear, and Lamar, ghost. Rivers betrayed them both. Together, they built and destroyed the most feared criminal empire New York City had ever seen. But what started as power turned into paranoia, bloodshed, and a final betrayal that would leave East Grimside forever changed. This is the chilling true story of how loyalty crumbled, silence ruled, and a new evil quietly rose from the ruins. East Grimside wasn't always a name that inspired fear. In fact, just a few decades ago, it was a forgotten pocket of New York City, struggling under the weight of poverty, unemployment, and neglect. Rows of aging apartment buildings stood like tired sentinels, their bricks cracked, windows boarded, and stairwells heavy with the scent of mildew and hopelessness. But all of that changed when Terrance Colby, better known as T-Roc, returned from a short prison stint in 2001. He had spent 2 years upstate for illegal firearms possession, a light sentence, but it gave him time to think, plan, and plot his rise. T-Roc wasn't the typical street thug. Before prison, he had dabbled in amateur boxing and was known in the neighborhood for his sharp mind and natural charisma. When he came back, he wasn't interested in being a follower. He wanted control. He wanted power, and he had a vision for East Grimside, a vision built not on hope, but on dominance. At first, T-Roc started small. He gathered a crew of trusted childhood friends and began taking over local drug corners. The existing players were sloppy, disorganized, and divided. T-Roc offered something different: unity, structure, and ruthless enforcement. He called his crew the Vultures. The name wasn't just for show. It reflected their method. They circled quietly, struck suddenly, and picked everything clean. Within a year, the Vultures had consolidated control of East Grimside's drug trade. Crack, heroin, pills. Everything ran through them. As the money started rolling in, T-Roc expanded. He wasn't satisfied with just running drugs. He wanted a criminal empire. He invested in corner stores, laundromats, and underground gambling dens. He used these places to clean his money and expand his influence. The Vultures were now more than just a gang. They were a machine, and T-Roc was the one turning the gears. Word about East Grimside spread quickly. Rival gangs attempted to muscle in but found themselves pushed back with calculated violence. T-Roc rarely got his own hands dirty. He didn't need to. He had enforcers for that. Men like Malik, Stone, Jefferson, who would soon become the face of fear in East Grimside. But T-Roc remained the brain. He kept a low profile, never flashing wealth in public. He walked the streets like a man in control, yet invisible to outsiders. He donated small amounts to local churches, bought groceries for elderly residents, and helped cover funeral costs for grieving families. In return, the neighborhood protected him. East Grimside began to transform. Crime was up, but so was silence. No one called the police. No one testified. Murders went unsolved, and disappearances were accepted as part of life. Children played beside walls riddled with bullet holes, and families locked their doors before sunset. Fear became part of the routine. One of the earliest turning points came when a local city councilman's nephew went missing. He had been last seen entering Grimside Park, a known vulture hangout spot. The media briefly covered the story, but nothing came of it. Police investigated quietly, but no leads emerged. Behind the scenes, it was whispered that T-Roc had something to do with it, that the boy had seen something he shouldn't have. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. The message was clear: don't cross the Vultures. In just 5 years, East Grimside went from a crumbling neighborhood to a self-contained empire under criminal rule. It wasn't pretty, but it was efficient. The Vultures operated with the precision of a business. New recruits were trained, watched, and disciplined. Those who stepped out of line vanished. Internal codes were enforced. Loyalty was rewarded. Betrayal was punished. Always. T-Roc's strength didn't just come from fear. It came from control. Every dollar, every weapon, every whisper ran through him. He made sure nothing moved without his say. He studied how corporate companies operated and applied it to the streets. He paid attention to detail. Surveillance systems were installed throughout the hood, not to catch crime, but to prevent betrayal. He didn't trust the police, but he respected their power. He kept them at a distance by avoiding flashy violence and maintaining low-profile operations. By 2006, East Grimside was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a symbol of what happens when ambition, strategy, and brutality come together in the wrong hands. Other gangs started mimicking the Vultures. Some tried to form alliances. Others tried to destroy them. None succeeded. And yet, for all the power T-Roc held, trouble was slowly brewing beneath the surface. Inside the Vultures, small cracks were forming. Power has a way of attracting enemies, even from within. And in the shadows of East Grimside, a quiet storm was beginning to form. One that would threaten to bring everything crashing down. Malik, Stone. Jefferson wasn't just another street soldier. He was the backbone of the Vultures' dominance. If T-Roc was the strategist behind East Grimside's transformation, Stone was the enforcer who made the plans real. Towering, broad-shouldered, and always dressed in black, he moved through the streets like a shadow no one dared cross. His silence was more terrifying than threats. People said you never heard him coming. You just felt him before it was too late. Stone grew up in East Grimside. Long before he joined the Vultures, he was already known as someone not to be messed with. He had a reputation for settling scores quickly and brutally. Raised by a single mother who died of an overdose when he was 14, Stone was left to survive on his own. He didn't just grow up on the streets. He became part of them. He never finished school, never held a real job, but everyone in the neighborhood knew he was dangerous. When T-Roc returned from prison and started building his empire, Stone was one of the first to be recruited. He didn't ask questions. He didn't complain. He simply did what needed to be done. That made him indispensable. When T-Roc needed someone intimidated, Stone knocked on the door. When someone needed to disappear, Stone made it happen. When loyalty wavered, Stone was the reminder. Under his watch, no one dared to challenge the Vultures' rule. His presence alone was enough to clear a street corner or shut down a gathering. Stone wasn't just feared by outsiders. He terrified members of his own crew. He had no tolerance for mistakes, no patience for weakness. One of his earliest acts that cemented his reputation was the gaslight incident, where 3 low-level dealers tried to move stolen product through East Grimside without T-Roc's permission. Stone personally tracked them down. 2 were found in dumpsters a week later. The 3rd was never seen again. No one asked questions after that. Fear kept order, and Stone was the face of it. Despite his brutal methods, Stone had a twisted sense of loyalty. He believed in structure, in following the code T-Roc had set. But after the death of his younger brother, everything began to change. His brother Jamal had been caught in a high-speed chase with police. The car flipped. Jamal died at the scene. The official report claimed it was an accident, but Stone never believed it. He thought the police had run his brother off the road intentionally. That loss shifted something in him. The calm, calculated enforcer started to unravel. He became more violent, less predictable. Suspicions became punishments. Whispers turned into beatings. Associates who had been trusted for years suddenly vanished. Even T-Roc began to worry, but no one challenged Stone directly. His reputation was too solid. Too many people owed their lives, or their deaths, to him. Still, the shift in his behavior caused quiet concern inside the gang. Stone started operating on his own terms. He launched side operations without T-Roc's knowledge. He funneled money through unknown channels, recruited people outside the chain of command, and began questioning orders. His loyalty hadn't disappeared, but it had changed shape. He still believed in the Vultures, but now he believed he was the only one who could keep them strong. The police were terrified of him. Detectives who worked the East Grimside beat knew his name, but no one could make a case stick. Witnesses refused to speak. Surveillance never caught him in the act. The few who did try to cooperate disappeared before they could testify. It was almost as if Stone could see everything before it happened. As T-Roc focused on expanding the business and dealing with outside threats, he failed to see what was happening under his nose. Stone wasn't planning a takeover, but he was building his own kingdom within the empire. He had his own network of lieutenants, runners, and enforcers. Some feared that he was preparing to split off. Others feared that he was no longer fully under T-Roc's control. Tensions began to rise quietly. Meetings became shorter. Orders became vague. Stone stopped showing up at regular times and stopped answering to anyone. The neighborhood noticed. The violence grew more frequent. Bodies began to turn up with no warning, no explanation. Even longtime Vulture members started to keep their distance from Stone. Yet, no one could deny that he was still effective. With Stone enforcing order, no rival gang dared step foot into East Grimside. The money kept flowing. The streets remained locked down. But underneath the surface, something dangerous was building. Stone wasn't just feared anymore. He was unstable, and in a world built on control, instability is a crack that can break everything apart. By 2016, the fear that once united the Vultures had become a weapon turning inward. Some members began quietly talking about Stone behind closed doors, wondering how long before he snapped completely. T-Roc may have created the empire, but it was Stone who kept it standing. And now, slipping through cities, it seemed like the man holding it all together was the same one who might bring it crashing down. Lamar, Ghost. Rivers arrived in East Grimside in early 2017. He was different from the others, not loud, not flashy, and certainly not someone who looked like a threat. He didn't have a criminal record, didn't show off tattoos, and rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. That quiet presence made him stand out in a world where loud threats and gunplay were the norm. T-Roc noticed him quickly. Ghost claimed to be from the Bronx, with connections in uptown laundering networks. He said he'd worked with local gangs in moving product through cash businesses, bodegas, barbershops, and car washes. What made him valuable was his understanding of digital money trails. He didn't just know how to clean money. He knew how to make it disappear completely. For a growing empire like the Vultures, that was priceless. T-Roc brought him in, cautiously at first, but Ghost quickly proved himself. He set up new laundering channels using cryptocurrency, shell companies, and offshore accounts. He trained a few trusted crew members on how to use encrypted apps and devices that couldn't be easily traced. Within months, the Vultures' finances were more secure than ever. Raids couldn't track their revenue. Seized phones didn't lead to operations. Ghost's influence grew quietly but rapidly. What no one knew was that Ghost had walked into East Grimside with a mission. His cousin, Sean, had been caught in a crossfire years earlier during a turf war involving the Vultures. Sean had just turned 20, a college student home on break, in the wrong place at the wrong time. The police had no suspects. The community had no answers. But Ghost never forgot. He joined the feds not long after and worked undercover assignments until he was chosen for the most dangerous one yet. Penetrate the Vultures from the inside. It wasn't just about justice. For Ghost, this was personal. He didn't wear a wire. That would be suicide in a place like East Grimside. Instead, he used burner phones, encrypted messages, and hidden SD cards. Every deal, every name, every location was documented and stored in multiple secure places. He knew what Stone had done to suspected snitches. Ghost couldn't afford a single mistake. Over time, he began to notice patterns in the organization. T-Roc was organized and smart, but distracted. He was more focused on expanding into other boroughs, leaving more day-to-day control to people like Stone. That gave Ghost room to operate, but also exposed him to danger. He was trusted enough to be included in meetings, but not close enough to be protected if something went wrong. By mid-2018, Ghost had become T-Roc's unofficial second in command for financial matters. He was managing the gang's accounts, reviewing their cash flow, and making sure no digital fingerprints were left behind. But with more responsibility came more risk. Ghost had to constantly walk a tightrope, gathering evidence while staying invisible. His biggest fear wasn't being caught by police or rival gangs. It was being caught by Stone. Stone never liked Ghost. From the beginning, he distrusted his quiet demeanor and lack of history. He started asking questions, watching him more closely. Ghost sensed the danger but tried to act normal. He couldn't afford to show any fear or break his routine. Everything changed in the fall of 2018. One night, Ghost returned to his apartment and immediately noticed something was off. A drawer he never used was slightly open. His laptop was missing. The emergency SD card he always kept hidden behind a vent cover was gone. Ghost didn't wait. He knew what that meant. Stone had found something, or at least enough to suspect the truth. Within the hour, Ghost was gone. He vanished from East Grimside without telling anyone. His phone was destroyed. His apartment was set on fire the next night, likely by someone sent by Stone. The Vultures were in chaos. T-Roc demanded answers. Stone offered none. He claimed Ghost had been stealing money and ran before facing punishment. Some believed it. Others weren't so sure. The truth was already in motion. Before leaving, Ghost had delivered everything. Documents, names, locations, surveillance clips, to a federal handler. The case that had taken over a year to build was finally ready. And Ghost? He disappeared completely. No one saw him again. Some say he entered witness protection. Others think Stone found him before the feds could. His fate became a mystery, a ghost story whispered through the city. But his mission was complete. The Vultures had been exposed from within, and while the empire still stood, for now, its foundation had been cracked. A storm was coming, and no one inside East Grimside was ready for what would come next. The early morning of April 5, 2019, started like any other in East Grimside. The streets were quiet, the sky still dim, and the city beginning to stir. But before sunrise, silence was shattered as dozens of unmarked vehicles rolled into the neighborhood from every direction. Federal agents, NYPD units, and tactical teams moved in like a coordinated army. Operation Iron Nest had begun. Its target, the Vultures. In just under 2 hours, more than 40 members were arrested. Some were dragged from their homes in handcuffs, others were caught trying to run. SWAT teams raided stash houses, garages, and apartments. They seized weapons, cash, documents, and electronic devices. The entire neighborhood was placed under lockdown. Streets were blocked. Helicopters hovered overhead. It was the largest coordinated raid East Grimside had ever seen. T-Roc was arrested without resistance. He had been at a luxury spa in Brooklyn, attempting to negotiate a deal with a group from out of state. Agents surrounded him in the sauna. Calm and composed, he asked for a towel before being handcuffed. In contrast, Stone's arrest was a war zone. When agents stormed one of the safe houses on 119th Street, they found Stone heavily armed, wearing a bulletproof vest, and prepared to die. What followed was a violent shootout that lasted nearly 7 minutes. 2 officers were wounded. Stone took multiple rounds to the torso and leg before collapsing. Bloodied and conscious, he was dragged out and immediately transported to a trauma center. His injuries left him paralyzed from the waist down. It was the final act of a man who had spent years holding together the most feared gang in the city. Back at headquarters, the evidence gathered by Ghost was laid out. Over 200 pages of financial records, wire transfers, and hidden camera footage had been verified and matched to testimony. Everything was cross-checked, and the case was airtight. The Vultures had been documented selling drugs, laundering millions through fake businesses, bribing officials, and eliminating threats. For the first time, the law had all the pieces. The trial of Terrance, T-Roc, Colby was a media sensation. News outlets flooded the court, publishing photos of the once feared kingpin sitting calmly behind a table in an orange jumpsuit. He showed no emotion throughout the proceedings. He didn't speak much, didn't argue, and didn't fight the charges. His lawyer attempted to challenge the validity of Ghost's recordings, but the digital fingerprints were undeniable. Ghost had not only captured voices but also visuals, meetings, drop-offs, even maps of the organization's structure. One of the most chilling pieces of evidence shown in court was a spreadsheet, carefully organized by Ghost, listing payouts to corrupt businesses, police officers, and politicians. The spreadsheet matched deposits, withdrawals, and offshore transfers down to the cent. Even T-Roc's silence couldn't undo that kind of proof. He was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Stone's trial was short and brutal. Confined to a wheelchair, he appeared in court surrounded by armed guards. He refused to speak, staring blankly through every testimony. Multiple murder charges were brought against him, alongside attempted murder of federal agents. Surveillance footage from years prior, long suspected to exist but never recovered, was now presented thanks to Ghost's secret recordings. Stone was sentenced to life in a maximum security medical facility. The aftermath of the operation sent shockwaves through the city. East Grimside had never seen such a swift fall from power. Businesses once linked to the Vultures were closed down. Abandoned homes were searched and cleared. New law enforcement teams were assigned to monitor the area full-time. The NYPD declared victory. Politicians praised the operation. But on the streets, people were less certain. Fear had ruled East Grimside for so long that its removal left a strange vacuum. Some residents rejoiced, relieved that the violence might finally end. Others feared retaliation or worse, replacement. Because in the world of organized crime, power doesn't vanish, it shifts. Within weeks, graffiti began appearing on alley walls. New tags, unfamiliar symbols. Rumors spread of former Vulture affiliates reorganizing under a new name. Whispers filled barbershops and bodegas. A new gang, quieter, smarter, had begun moving in. The Hollow Sons, as they were now being called, were rumored to be led by younger recruits, those trained under T-Roc and Stone, but hungry for their own identity. Law enforcement braced for what could come next. Ghost's work had crippled the Vultures, but it hadn't erased the culture that gave them life. East Grimside was wounded, but still dangerous, and though its two most powerful figures were gone, the story of its fall was far from over. In crime, destruction is never the end. It's only the beginning of something new. Today, East Grimside looks different, but the weight of its past still hangs in the air. The buildings have fresh paint, some streets are newly paved, and a few community centers have popped up where crack houses once stood. But the silence, the looks over shoulders, and the cautious way people speak about those days remind everyone that the ghosts of the Vultures haven't left. The headlines may have moved on, but the damage remains. The fall of T-Roc and Stone didn't erase fear. It simply shifted its form. In the months following the trial, federal and city agencies worked hard to clean up East Grimside. Additional patrols, neighborhood outreach programs, and redevelopment projects were pushed into the area. For a short time, there was hope that real change had arrived. But change in places like East Grimside doesn't happen overnight. And sometimes, it doesn't come at all. Rumors began quietly, like they always do. First, it was whispers about sightings, young men in dark hoodies gathering outside closed businesses, carrying burner phones, moving like they had a plan. Then came the new symbols, tagged in alleyways, behind dumpsters, etched into playground benches. A black sun with a slit through the middle. No names were attached to it at first, but the message was clear: something was rising from the ashes. The Hollow Sons had no known leader, no official turf, and no public agenda. But those familiar with the streets could see the pattern. Former Vulture foot soldiers, still in their 20s, began reappearing with money and new connections. They weren't violent like Stone's crew had been. They were quiet, organized, and less obvious. That made them harder to catch, and potentially more dangerous. Where the Vultures used muscle and fear, the Hollow Sons used patience and technology. They weren't interested in headlines, they were interested in longevity. The NYPD created a task force to investigate the group. But information was limited. No one talked. Everyone remembered what happened to people who opened their mouths in the days of T-Roc and Stone. That memory was enough to keep them silent. And so, the law was left guessing again, watching, waiting, collecting scraps while a new empire slowly began to form. Even among the original Vultures, the fall hadn't reached everyone. A few high-ranking members had escaped during the raids. Their names never appeared in the paperwork Ghost handed over. Some believe they fled the city, others believe they blended back into the shadows, quietly helping the Hollow Sons from behind the scenes. No one knows for sure, but the reappearance of certain habits, ghost businesses, sudden cash flow, renewed fear, suggested that old hands were shaping the new machine. Ghost, the man who had started the collapse, remained a mystery. After the trial, there were no official statements about his whereabouts. He was never seen publicly again. Some say he was relocated by the federal government to another state under a new identity. Others believe he was eliminated, either by the same law enforcement he worked for, or by one of the few Vultures who slipped through the cracks. His story ended as it began, in silence. But to many in East Grimside, Ghost is a symbol, not of betrayal, but of reckoning. He proved that even the most feared empires have weak spots, that even the most dangerous men can fall. Still, his legacy is complicated. His actions shattered the old order, but in doing so, he left behind a vacuum. And in neighborhoods like this, power doesn't stay empty for long. Years later, people still glance over their shoulders when walking at night. Stores still keep metal grates locked even during business hours. Children still learn early which blocks to avoid. Fear may no longer wear the name Vultures, but it hasn't left. It's just evolved. Inside New York City's most dangerous hood, what began as a bold rise turned into a bloody reign, followed by a dramatic fall. But the cycle of power continues. The names change, the methods shift, but the game remains the same. The story of East Grimside isn't just about the Vultures or their empire. It's about a place where survival shapes identity, and silence is often the only form of protection. Crime here doesn't end, it transforms. And long after the sirens fade and the headlines disappear, the streets remember everything.